It started with the tire tracks. Fresh ruts cut through the heart of my cornfield, slicing straight lines of damage across 3 acres of green. The soil was still wet, and the air smelled of diesel and shame. The marks were not random. They were slow, heavy drives made to make sure the harm looked no accident. 4th time that week. I crouched by a crushed stalk, and my hand shook as I touched the torn leaves. The tire mark was clear. Luxury SUV-wide treads, all-terrain. Around here, only one person drove something that flashy. Victoria Peton, HOA treasurer herself, named queen of our quiet neighborhood, and the human version of a parking ticket. I could still hear her voice from last month's meeting, sweet but vicious. Rules keep the community calm, Daniel. Without structure, we are just chaos. Maybe she was right, but lately her structure felt a lot like rule by one person. The morning sun hung low and painted the field gold as I stood up and took a slow breath. Every part of me wanted to walk over to her big house and ask what she thought she was doing, but 30 years on the bench had taught me self-control. I had retired from the district court for peace and quiet. Instead, I found myself in a neighborhood courtroom with no laws, no appeal process, and a judge who used small-time bully power while wearing designer sunglasses. I wiped my hands on my jeans, looked once more at the ruined rows, and walked back to my house. My security cameras blinked red in quiet sympathy. They had caught the culprits before. The same white Escalade, the same late-night visits, but every complaint I filed disappeared into red tape. The local precinct said it was an HOA matter. The HOA called it a community maintenance activity. In other words, no one wanted to touch Victoria. That night, I watched the footage again. Headlights swept the corn like search beams, then the Escalade rolled in slow motion, driver window down. The person behind the wheel lifted a phone and took pictures of my cameras, my house, my fence. She was not hiding anymore. The next morning, a letter was on my porch. Violation notice number 47, unauthorized surveillance equipment visible from public areas. Remove it now, fine $500. The hypocrisy made me laugh out loud. She ruined my property, then fined me for filming it. The laugh stopped when I saw the signature at the bottom. Victoria Peton, President, Willow Ridge Estates HOA. President, not treasurer. When did that change? By noon, I was in the HOA office, a converted storage shed behind the community pool. The air smelled like toner and control. Victoria stood at the counter, clipboard in hand, telling 2 volunteers what to do. They looked like hostages at a bad company retreat. Daniel, she said, voice bright, but eyes sharp. We were just talking about your security cameras. They are cameras, I said flat. Legal on my land and within state privacy laws. She smiled the practiced political smile. State laws are one thing, community rules are another. Community rules do not beat constitutional rights. Her smile stayed. Then maybe take it up with our compliance committee. I would if it existed. I shot back. The last meeting was 2 years ago. The room went quiet. One volunteer stopped pretending to staple papers. I saw a flash of annoyance in her perfect stance, a small sign only lawyers catch. Mr. Rowan, she said, using my last name like a punch, your hostility is a pattern. Please remember your behavior affects property values. I leaned in enough for her perfume to sting my nose. So does fraud. Her lips moved a little, just enough to prove my gut right. She was hiding something. That night my phone buzzed. Officer Martinez, one of the few cops in this town who still answered, called. Judge Rowan, he said, using the title I could not drop. I checked those HOA complaints like you asked. And something is wrong. He said, papers rustling. Their state registration, Willow Ridge Estates, HOA, Inc. expired 2 years ago. No renewal filing since technically that HOA does not exist. For a moment I thought the line cut out. Expired, I said. Dissolved, he said. They lost incorporation status March 18th. 2023, everything they've done since then, meetings, fines, liens, none of it is legal. The words hit like lightning. 2 years. 2 years of threats, letters, fines, all from a ghost. Thanks for the tip, officer, I said. You just changed my weekend plans. When the call ended, I sat in the dark for a long time, and the weight of the truth pressed on me like humidity before a storm. Every memory of her smug smile, every fake violation, every family she shamed looked more dangerous now. This was not overreach. It was criminal impersonation. I spent the next 6 hours wide awake at my laptop, diving through state records like a detective. My fingers flew across the keys, checking filings, matching signatures, following paper trails. When I found the dissolution notice, I almost did not believe it. Official seal, timestamp, public record. Status dissolved, reason failure to file annual report. My coffee mug slipped from my hand and broke on the tile. 2 years. She had run a non-existent group, collected money, threatened neighbors, filed liens, all with fake power. I printed the paper. It shook in my hands. The printer sounded like the beat of coming justice. What started as a small fight had become a criminal case. The next morning, I drove to the county recorder's office. The clerk knew me from years in court and pulled the lien records I asked for. 17 of them, all filed by Willow Ridge Estates, HOA. 17 families trapped by forged authority. I could barely hold back the anger. "These are fake legal papers," I said quietly. The clerk frowned. "You want me to? Just print copies." I cut in. "I will handle the rest." Back home, I spread the papers across my dining table like a detective board. Each lien told a story. A retired couple fined for banned garden decor. A single mother charged for wrong garbage storage. A young family threatened with foreclosure over a swing set. Every signature led back to Victoria Peton. The real fine came when I followed the money. The HOA account went to a shell company, Community Compliance Solutions, LLC. Checked the tax papers, and there she was again, Victoria Peton, listed as managing member. Another company, Metro Recovery Services, same address, same name. She was paying herself to scare her neighbors. The laptop fan sounded like a jet as I downloaded everything: statements, invoices, links. Each file fed the fire in my chest. I was not just angry anymore. I felt alive in a way I had not since my last day on the bench. The law still mattered, and I finally had a case to fight. By midnight, I had enough evidence to ruin her career and maybe even put her in jail. I called District Attorney Patricia Wolf, an old colleague. "Pat, it is Dan Rowan. Dan, you are retired. What is this at midnight? You need to see this. Think suburban mafia with slides." She laughed. "That's specific. I am serious. Fake. HOA dissolved company, 17 bogus liens, theft, over $100,000. She was quiet, then whistled. "You sure? I have the dissolution papers in my hand. When can you bring them?" "Tomorrow morning. I will clear a conference room. If this is what you say it is organized fraud. Not discovered. I lived it," I said, looking at the papers under my lamp. Outside, thunder rolled a long, overdue storm. The rain started around dawn, thin, silver needles tapping the roof like a metronome for justice. By the time I reached the county prosecutor's office, the storm had turned the streets into rivers. I walked in dripping, clutching a folder thick enough to choke a paper shredder. The receptionist buzzed Patricia Wolf's line without a word. That's the kind of history we had. 30 years of courtroom battles and grudging respect. She met me halfway down the hall, coffee in hand, hair streaked with the same gray auburn from her senior prosecutor days. "Dan Rowan," she said, half smiling. "The man who swore he'd never step foot in another courthouse. Turns out retirement's overrated," I said, shrugging off my raincoat. We went into a beige conference room that smelled of coffee and disinfectant. I dropped the folder on the table. "Everything you need to take down a fake government." Pat raised a brow. "You're underselling it already." As she read, curiosity shifted to disbelief, then anger. The dissolution notice stopped her cold. 2 years, she murmured. "They've been dissolved for 2 years. Everything since then is void," I said. "Every fine, lien, and threat illegal." Pat flipped another page. "Victoria Peton. She's the architect. Set up shell LLCs, funneled payments, filed fake liens. Used fear as currency." She looked up. "And the residents? They thought it was real. When a letter looks official, people don't question it. They pay or lose their homes." Pat leaned back. "Fraud, forgery, wire transfers, maybe racketeering if we follow the money. We'll need witnesses." "I'll get them," I said. She gave me a look. "You up for testifying, Judge?" "I never stopped being one," I said. "Just change the courtroom." By afternoon, we had a task group, Pat, 2 investigators, and me. The corkboard filled with photos, bank screenshots, fake letters. Lopez, the rookie, pointed at a list. All these companies share the same P.O. box. Classic laundering, Pat said. I added, each one forms after someone challenges a fine. She builds new fronts whenever someone gets too close. Lopez whistled. That's organized. She's a tactician, I said. Pat glanced at me. You know her well. I've been her target for 6 months. That night, I drove home through flooded streets. My house felt less like a sanctuary, more like a war room. Somewhere, Victoria was sipping wine, unaware her empire was crumbling. But power like hers doesn't last 2 years on charm alone. Someone was helping her. I scanned the documents. Board members long gone, except one. Colin Davis, legal advisor. Disbarred paralegal. I remembered his face, nervous, watchful. I jotted his name. I need it soon. Next morning, Pat called. First witness, Lauren Tate. Single mom. Peton threatened foreclosure. Lauren arrived shaking, clutching an envelope. They said I owed $1,200 for fence paint violations. When I appealed, they suspended appeals. Then came the lien threat. They can't do that, I said. Pat handed her the dissolution notice. This HOA's been dead 2 years. Lauren's eyes filled. All this time, yes, Pat said. You're not alone. Lauren opened her envelope. Receipts, emails, texts. Every payment, they said it'd restore my account. But the fines never stopped. Each page she handed over was another nail in Victoria's coffin. Pat smiled grimly. That's exactly what we needed. By week's end, we had 6 witnesses. Stories of threats, extortion, fear. The evidence pile doubled. Then someone leaked it. Fake HOA under investigation hit the news. Cameras swarmed the gates. Victoria called a special meeting. I showed up, front row, camera rolling. She stood in a white blazer, voice calm and rehearsed. These rumors are lies spread by angry residents, she said. I raised my hand. Then why was your corporation dissolved 2 years ago? Her smile froze. Administrative error. We filed for reinstatement. Yesterday, I said, holding up a timestamp. Gasps rippled through the room. Her mask cracked for a heartbeat. This meeting is adjourned. Outside, rain fell lightly, cleansing, not punishing. Neighbors approached me quietly. Is it true? We can stop paying. Yes, I said. You can, and you should. That night, I sat on my porch, listening to the rain. For the first time, fear had changed sides. Now, she was the one being watched. The storm broke before dawn, but the air still carried that electric heaviness that follows a night of thunder. My phone buzzed before the coffee finished brewing. First Pat, then neighbors, then Channel 9 asking for comment. It had happened. The story was out. Fake HOA under federal investigation. The headline glowed on my phone like a verdict. I stood by the window, watching the sun burn through retreating clouds, realizing something simple but dangerous. Truth has a sound. Loud, unstoppable, and once heard, it can't be unheard. By 9 a.m., cars lined both sides of Maple Hollow Drive. Reporters, residents, lawyers. And at the center stood Victoria Peton, queen of the cul-de-sac, perfect hair, pressed suit, pretending the world wasn't collapsing. I met Pat in the precinct lot. She looked like she'd been up all night, but carried that old spark. They're moving fast, she said. FBI's Financial Crimes Unit picked it up. We're officially partners. Good, I said. She'll call a witch hunt. We'll need airtight evidence. Pat smiled. Then we'll give them steel. Inside, the task force room buzzed. Agents unpacking laptops. Maps pinned with reports of extortion and harassment. Agent Reeves, broad-shouldered and calm, shook my hand. Mr. Rowan, your file's impressive. Had practice building case files, I said. He smirked. Good. You'll testify when this hits grand jury. By afternoon, subpoenas flew like confetti. Bank records, phone logs, emails. Every piece of Victoria's empire was being dismantled. I should have felt triumphant, but she wasn't the surrendering type. Around 7 p.m., a sleek black SUV rolled past my driveway. Same make as the Escalade that ruined my cornfield. It paused, window lowering just enough for a flash. Then sped off. She was documenting me again. Not fear, fury. I sent the footage to Reeves. He called back minutes later. We'll handle it. She's getting desperate. Desperate people make mistakes, I said. That's what we're counting on. The next morning, new envelopes appeared on every doorstep. Bold red letters. Mandatory community meeting. Victoria wasn't backing down. She was staging a counterattack. I called Pat. She's doubling down. FBI wants you there, she said. Record everything. Stay calm. Calm, I said. Sure. The meeting was held in the old community hall. Flickering lights, gray walls, folding chairs. When I walked in, every head turned. Victoria stood by the podium, flanked by two men who looked like hired muscle. Mr. Rowan, she said sweetly. So glad you joined us. Wouldn't miss it, I replied. Her speech was smooth and venomous. Friends, we've been targeted by lies. Certain individuals, she looked at me, seek revenge. The projector lit up with images of my house, my cameras, even group chats. This man, she said, has harassed your elected officials. Classic tactic, flood the room with fear and noise. What she didn't know was that my hidden cameras were recording every word. Then she made her fatal move. Holding a stack of affidavits, she declared, "These are sworn statements against Judge Rowan. We've filed for protective orders." She began reading names, friends, witnesses, all forged. Forgery, identity theft, false witness, all federal crimes committed in front of 60 people. Based on this, she said dramatically, I'm calling 911. The dispatcher's calm voice replied, Ma'am, is there an actual physical threat? This is physical, she shrieked. Another pause. Ma'am, we've had multiple prior complaints. Unless weapons are involved, this remains a civil matter. Click. Silence. Her face flushed. Her hand shook. This proves corruption, she yelled. The crowd murmured. Her authority deflated in real time. I stood, walked to the front, and held up the state dissolution papers. This HOA ceased to exist 2 years ago. Every fine, every lien, criminal fraud. Gasps. Phones came out. The truth hit like a hammer. She's lying. Victoria screamed, but residents were already checking the registry. You stole our pensions, one shouted. You terrorized our kids, yelled another. Then came the sound that ended it all, the doors bursting open as federal agents entered. Reeves led the team himself. Victoria Peton, he said, you're under arrest for wire fraud, mail fraud, and operating a dissolved corporation. The cuffs clicked shut, metal on bone, justice on record. Victoria screamed about conspiracies, but no one listened. Dozens filmed her arrest. As they led her away, she turned, eyes wild. This isn't over. It already is, I said. That night, I sat outside under a clear sky. The neighborhood was quiet. No engines, no threats. Just crickets and the faint laughter of kids. The storm had passed, but the reckoning had only begun. The morning after Victoria's arrest felt unreal. The neighborhood buzzed like a beehive, cracked open. News vans parked along the curbs, drones humming overhead, microphones poking past fences. It was chaos wrapped in catharsis. I stood on my porch with a mug of black coffee, watching the swarm. For months, I'd been the villain in her story. Now I was the headline hero in everyone else's. HOA president arrested in federal fraud case. Suburban tyrant exposed. Retired judge uncovers fake government. I should have felt vindicated. Instead, I felt tired. The kind of tired that seeps into your bones when you've carried too much truth for too long. By noon, the FBI had turned Victoria's house into an active crime scene. Yellow tape stretched across her driveway. Agents hauling out computers, file boxes, and what looked suspiciously like a safe. Residents gathered in clusters, whispering as if speaking too loudly might break the spell of justice. Pat Wolf arrived, sunglasses shielding eyes that had seen too many liars unravel. Morning, Judge, she said, handing me a copy of the preliminary indictment. 12 counts. Wire fraud, mail fraud, conspiracy, false filings, and operating a dissolved corporation. I scanned the pages. They'll throw the book at her. More like the whole library, Pat said. And thanks to your recordings, we've got her on tape committing at least half of it in front of witnesses. Any sign of the accomplices? Pat smirked. Colin Davis is singing like a canary. Turns out he kept receipts, emails, routing numbers, even a ledger of fake fines. He's cutting a deal. I stared toward the cul-de-sac, where agents carried another box from Victoria's garage. She always thought she was untouchable. She was, until you decided not to be afraid anymore. Later that afternoon, I walked the neighborhood for the first time without looking over my shoulder. It felt different, lighter, though the air still smelled faintly of burnt coffee and media exhaust. Mrs. Penelope was in her yard, trimming rose bushes that had suffered months of neglect. When she saw me, her face broke into a tremulous smile. "They really took her?" she asked, almost afraid to believe it. "They did," I said. "She's facing federal charges." Tears welled in her eyes. "You don't know what that means to us." She fined me $300 for hanging wind chimes. Said it violated visual uniformity standards. I couldn't help but laugh. "You can hang 100 now." "I just might," she said and hugged me. Her perfume was floral and warm, a welcome contrast to the chemical sweetness that used to linger after Victoria's visits. As I walked away, I passed the Hendersons' driveway. Their kids were drawing chalk murals, bright suns, smiling stick figures, flowers as big as houses. For months, those same kids had been afraid to play outside. Now their laughter carried across the block like music. Freedom has a sound too. It's softer than justice, but just as powerful. The legal wheels turned fast. Within a week, the federal indictment became public record. Victoria's mugshot was everywhere. Makeup smeared, eyes wild, the same expression I'd seen the night she realized the police weren't coming to rescue her. The press wanted interviews, op-eds, sound bites. I gave one statement, short and deliberate. This wasn't about revenge. It was about accountability. No one should be able to weaponize fear and paperwork to steal power. That quote ended up on headlines coast to coast. Suddenly, I was the HOA whistleblower, invited to talk shows and community panels. But I wasn't chasing fame. I was chasing closure. Still, I won't lie. It was gratifying to see her empire crumble piece by piece. 2 weeks later, I sat in the courtroom gallery for her first appearance. The same courtroom I'd presided over years ago as a judge. The irony wasn't lost on me. Victoria entered in an orange jumpsuit, wrists cuffed, her posture rigid as steel. The confident smirk was gone. She looked smaller, brittle. The prosecutor read out the charges, each one a hammer blow. The judge asked, "How do you plead?" "Not guilty," she said, her voice a thin wire. Her attorney, a nervous man with a stack of papers and no hope, placed a hand on her shoulder. My client maintains she was unaware of the corporation's dissolution. I almost laughed. Unaware doesn't buy a new Mercedes with stolen dues. The judge set bail at $250,000 and imposed travel restrictions. The gavel came down with a satisfying crack, and, just like that, the woman who'd terrorized hundreds of families was officially a defendant in federal court. Outside, reporters swarmed. I ignored the microphones until I heard one question that stopped me cold. "Mr. Rowan, do you believe justice will be served?" I looked straight into the camera. Justice isn't just about punishment. It's about repair. That's what comes next. The repair began sooner than I expected. The FBI coordinated with the State Attorney General's office to establish a restitution fund. Every fraudulent dollar Victoria collected would be returned, with interest. When the first checks arrived 6 weeks later, it was like Christmas morning. Mrs. Penelope cried when she opened hers. The Hendersons threw a barbecue for the whole block. Even Frank Morrison, who'd lost nearly $5,000, called it the best investment I never meant to make. One by one, the walls that fear had built came down. Neighbors started waving again. Kids played in the streets without looking over their shoulders. The clipboard tyranny was over. But not everything was simple. One evening, I found a letter in my mailbox. No stamp, just my name, written in looping cursive. Inside was a single page and signed. "You think this is over? Power never dies. It just changes hands." I showed it to Agent Reeves the next day. He scanned it, shrugged. Could be her, could be one of her sympathizers. "We'll trace it." "Let me guess," I said. "Don't engage." He smiled faintly. "You're learning." Still, the note haunted me. Because it was true. Power doesn't die easily. It mutates. I realized that if we didn't build something better, someone else would fill the vacuum she left behind. So we did. The residents voted unanimously to form a legitimate association, this time with oversight, transparency, and rotating leadership. Pat helped draft the new bylaws. Frank Morrison became treasurer. Mrs. Penelope volunteered as secretary. And me? I declined any formal role. I've had enough of authority to last a lifetime, I told them. We called the new group the Maple Hollow Cooperative. No hierarchy, no fear, just neighbors. Our first motion passed unanimously. The Peton Clause. Any resident can request financial reports, incorporation documents, or board minutes within 24 hours. Failure to comply triggers automatic dissolution. It wasn't revenge. It was armor. Months passed. The news cycle moved on. Victoria eventually took a plea deal, 18 months in federal prison, full restitution, lifetime ban from any HOA or civic management role. Her mansion sold at auction, proceeds divided among victims. When a notice arrived confirming my reimbursement check had cleared, I didn't celebrate. I just sat in my garden, hands in the soil, feeling the earth settle beneath me. Some debts can't be repaid in money. They're paid in peace. For the first time in years, Maple Hollow sounded alive again. Justice had been served. But more importantly, the balance had been restored. Sometimes, the real reckoning isn't the fall of the villain. It's the quiet rebuilding afterward, when ordinary people decide they'll never be afraid again. Peace is a strange sound. It's not silence exactly. More like the low hum of sprinklers turning on at dawn, the creak of porch swings, the murmur of neighbors talking without suspicion. For the first time in years, Willowbrook felt alive. But underneath that peace, something else stirred, a faint vibration of memory, like the ghost of tension refusing to die. I'd learned in courtrooms that victory never comes clean. Justice leaves residue, bitterness, ambition, the illusion of control. And sometimes, that residue clings harder than the original crime. By the end of spring, the neighborhood was reborn. The new HOA, legally incorporated this time, met every first Tuesday in the renovated community center. The old mildew smell was gone, replaced by fresh paint and the scent of lemon polish. We'd installed a mural near the entrance, children planting flowers under the words, "Transparency grows trust." I'd suggested the quote, half out of irony, half out of faith. Frank Morrison, now treasurer, had become the voice of reason. His spreadsheets were works of art, color-coded, meticulous, blessedly honest. Mrs. Penelope chaired the finance committee. Sarah Henderson ran community outreach. It was democracy by the book, open ballots, published minutes, real accountability. And yet, even as laughter filled the meetings, I sometimes caught myself scanning the room for signs of dissent. A nervous glance here, a whispered comment there. Habits die hard, especially when you've lived under tyranny disguised as civic duty. Cordelia's ghost lingered in ways I hadn't expected. A month after her sentencing, the federal prosecutor emailed me the official press release. Former HOA president convicted of federal fraud scheme. I printed it and pinned it to the bulletin board in my garage, a quiet reminder that power, unchecked, always corrupts. But lately, I'd begun to wonder if I was pinning it there for myself. The call started in early summer. Small disputes, nothing like the old days. A neighbor upset about someone's uncut grass. A complaint about late-night noise from teenagers. Judge Sterling, "You handled these things before," they'd say, as if authority were a tool you could take out and dust off whenever convenience demanded. At first, I tried to deflect. "We have a board now," I'd remind them. "There's a process." But the more I said it, the more they insisted. It was as though Cordelia's downfall had left a vacuum, and vacuums crave filling. One evening, while pruning tomato vines, Frank stopped by holding a manila folder. His face was serious, not the kind of serious that precedes bad news, but the kind that precedes caution. "Got a minute?" he asked. "Always." He handed me the folder. Inside were photos, security camera stills of someone dumping bags of trash into the storm drain near the park. "Happened 3 times this week," Frank said. Residents are demanding action. I studied the grainy images. The suspect looked like a teenager, maybe 16, wearing a hoodie and gloves. Probably just a kid trying to avoid a fine, I said. Maybe, but the new Code Violations Committee wants to authorize citations. They asked if you could review it. I frowned. Why me? Frank hesitated. Because they trust you. Because you know how to handle this stuff. I set the folder down on the workbench, next to a basket of ripe tomatoes. The smell of soil and fresh fruit should have grounded me, but instead it made the moment feel heavier, like history looping on itself. I'm not the law anymore, Frank. He nodded slowly. No, you're not. But sometimes, people still see you as the balance between reason and madness. The phrase lingered long after he left. Balance between reason and madness. Maybe that was all justice ever was. That night, I couldn't sleep. The air was thick, heavy with humidity and crickets. I walked out to the porch, the same place where Cordelia's threats used to arrive like clockwork. Now, it was quiet, except for the faint rustle of someone's sprinkler across the street. I thought about the trash photos, the phone calls, the subtle ways authority resurrects itself under the guise of responsibility. It would be so easy to step in again, to restore order, to guide, to control. The thought terrified me precisely because it felt comforting. By morning, I decided to visit Sarah Henderson. Her front porch was a mosaic of chalk drawings, suns, hearts, and a crude but heartfelt portrait of her family. She was sipping coffee when I arrived. You look like a man haunted by something that isn't quite there, she said, motioning me to sit. I might be, I admitted. People are asking me to intervene again. Small things, petty things. But it started to feel familiar. Sarah nodded, listening quietly. You're afraid of becoming what you fought. I'm afraid of what power does to good intentions, I said. She leaned back, considering. Then make sure it's never concentrated again. Decentralize it. Rotate authority. Make leadership temporary, not permanent. Her words hit with the clean precision of truth. The following Tuesday, I proposed a new bylaw amendment. No single board member may serve more than one consecutive term. All disciplinary authority must be shared by at least 3 members and subject to community vote. The motion passed unanimously. As we adjourned, I felt something inside me loosen, a knot I hadn't realized was still there. The applause wasn't for me this time. It was for a structure strong enough to survive without any one person holding it up. That night, I walked the neighborhood under a violet sky. Children laughed near the playground the Hendersons had built. Mrs. Penelope watered her garden, humming an old hymn. Every porch light glowed like a small promise. Peace, I realized, isn't the absence of conflict. It's the presence of trust. And trust doesn't grow from fear. It grows from shared accountability. When I reached my gate, I noticed something tucked beneath it, a small hand-drawn note, in a child's handwriting. Thank you for making our home safe again. Lily Henderson. I stood there for a long moment, the note trembling in my hand under the soft evening wind. Cordelia's shadow was gone, but the lesson she left behind would never fade. Power, no matter how noble its origin, must always answer to the people it serves. As I turned to go inside, my sprinklers clicked on, right on time, under no one's supervision but my own. And for the first time, I felt not like the neighborhood's protector, but its equal. If you told me a year earlier that our little neighborhood revolt would go viral, I would have laughed and changed the subject. I wasn't looking for fame. I was looking for peace, the kind that doesn't require lawyers, depositions, or federal warrants to maintain. But peace, it turned out, had a way of attracting attention. It started quietly, a local journalist follow-up segment titled Justice in the Suburbs, How One Neighborhood Fought Back. Sarah Kim's story aired on a Thursday night, and by Friday morning, my phone was vibrating like a blender. Email notifications, friend requests, media inquiries. The HOA story had exploded online. The headline on the biggest site read, "The retired judge who took down the fake HOA president." By Monday, it had 500,000 views. By Wednesday, 2 million. People were hungry for it, not just because Cordelia's downfall was entertaining in a karmic sense, but because it exposed something bigger. There were hundreds, maybe thousands, of neighborhoods dealing with their own mini-dictators, unregulated associations running like fiefdoms, extorting residents under the guise of community order. And now they saw us, a bunch of regular people who'd fought back and won. I got an email from a woman in Arizona. They fined me $200 for planting sunflowers. Said it disrupted uniform curb aesthetics. I thought I was crazy until I saw your story. Thank you for proving we're not alone. Another from Florida. Our HOA dissolved years ago, but they're still collecting dues. How do we check the state registry like you did? I began answering every message personally. At first, it was just thank yous and advice. Then came requests for help, legal templates, complaint letters, guidance on how to verify incorporation documents. Within a month, I had compiled a 20-page guide. Frank convinced me to upload it to a simple website. We called it HOA Freedom Watch. We expected maybe a few dozen downloads. By the end of the first week, it had over 10,000. The movement wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about education, empowerment, making sure no one else ever faced another Cordelia. The day the state legislature invited me to testify, I almost said no. Public speaking wasn't my thing. Courtrooms are different, controlled, structured, insulated by procedure. But standing before a panel of lawmakers, cameras flashing, journalists scribbling notes, that's exposure of a different kind. Still, when I looked out at the rows of faces, homeowners, retirees, single parents clutching binders of HOA violations, I realized something. I wasn't speaking for myself anymore. Transparency, I told the committee, is the cornerstone of trust. And trust, once broken, poisons entire communities. We cannot allow organizations that claim authority over citizens to operate in the dark. The bill that followed, the Community Accountability Act, passed unanimously 3 months later. Every HOA in the state was now required to maintain a public registry, publish audited finances, and disclose incorporation documents on demand. Noncompliance triggered automatic state review. For the first time, bureaucracy had chosen the side of the people. Back in Willowbrook, the changes were tangible, real. The restitution checks had started arriving. I'll never forget the morning Mrs. Penelope knocked on my door, her face wet with tears and sunlight. "Look," she said, holding the envelope like it contained her heart. $2, $8.47. With interest. She laughed, a sound that carried through the garden. "That pays for my granddaughter's first year of law school. She says she's going to specialize in consumer protection. To fight the next Cordelia," she told me. The Henderson family used their refund to build something I hadn't realized our community was missing: joy. A playground, bright and simple, at the edge of their yard. Chalk art spilled from their driveway to the sidewalk. Messages in pastel colors. Love wins, community strong, no more fear. Every time I walked past, I'd see the Henderson kids covered in dust and laughter, and I'd think, this is what justice should look like. Not punishment, not paperwork. Renewal. The next big change came from an unexpected place: the Federal Housing Administration. Apparently, our story had caught their attention too. I got a call from a Washington number one morning, and the voice on the other end said, "Judge Sterling, we've been following your case. We'd like your input on a national HOA accountability framework." I remember staring out the kitchen window, watching Mrs. Penelope trim her rose bushes across the street, and thinking how surreal it all was. A retired neighborhood judge, once accused of judicial terrorism, now helping write national policy. Life's sense of irony never disappointed. With the attention came the podcast invites, panel discussions, local radio segments. I didn't want celebrity, but I realized something crucial. Storytelling had power. If people could see what corruption looked like up close, the quiet kind that hides in bylaws and meeting notes, maybe they'd recognize it before it spread. So I said yes. Our community center became the stage for the first Willowbrook Civic Renewal Forum, hosted by a coalition of homeowner groups. The turnout was staggering. Over 300 people from different cities, some traveling hours to be there. Sarah Kim covered it live, interviewing residents whose lives had changed because of what we started. Frank spoke about fiscal transparency. Mrs. Penelope introduced the scholarship fund. I closed the event with a simple truth that had carried me through it all. Evil rarely announces itself with fangs and fire. Sometimes It was a clipboard and a smile. The only antidote is awareness. The applause lasted nearly a minute. That night, as I locked up the hall, Sarah approached me. "You realize this is bigger than one neighborhood, right?" she said, smiling. "You didn't just fight back. You lit a fuse." "Maybe," I said. "But if we did, I hope it burns bureaucracy instead of people." She laughed. "Good luck with that." By autumn, Willowbrook had become something like a symbol, a living case study of recovery. Journalists came and went. Residents learned to politely decline interviews, and life, somehow, settled back into rhythm. The smell of grilled burgers replaced tension. Neighbors waved without suspicion. The HOA office, once a nest of deceit, now smelled of coffee and printed agendas. One evening, I stood in my backyard, the last light of day painting the sky orange. My garden had never looked healthier. The soil was dark and rich, the vines thick with fruit. Maybe justice, like gardening, required patience. You prune the diseased branches, nourish what's left, and wait for something good to grow. I looked toward the Henderson house, where laughter floated through the open window, and realized something profound. We hadn't just rebuilt a neighborhood. We'd rewritten the blueprint for how power should work: transparent, accountable, shared. And somewhere, in a federal prison cell, I hope Cordelia was watching the news. Not out of spite, but because even villains deserve to see what real community looks like. The garden taught me patience long before the courts ever did. Justice, like growth, doesn't happen overnight. It takes water, sunlight, and the stubborn belief that something good can still grow in damaged soil. That's what I was thinking the morning I noticed the first blush of red on my tomatoes. The same morning the HOA Freedom Watch website hit 1 million downloads. 1 million people. 1 million households waking up to the idea that they could ask questions, verify authority, and stand their ground. I never set out to lead a movement. I just wanted my peace back. But peace, I learned, isn't something you find. It's something you build, one truth, one neighbor, one act of courage at a time. The last few months had transformed Willowbrook from a cautionary tale into a model of renewal. The local park had a new name, Liberty Green. Every year, the neighborhood now hosted the Willowbrook Diversity Festival, a celebration of food, art, and togetherness. Families brought dishes from every background imaginable. Empanadas beside samosas, biryani next to brisket. The air filled with laughter, music, and the smell of home-cooked victory. No one wore clipboards. No one measured grass length. The only rule was kindness. One afternoon in late summer, I sat with Mrs. Penelope under the shade of her magnolia tree. The air was thick with jasmine and old memories. She poured me tea, her hands trembling just slightly with age. "My granddaughter got her scholarship letter," she said, eyes shining. "She's been accepted into the state university's law program. Constitutional law, just like she promised." I smiled. The next generation of watchdogs. "She said something the other day that reminded me of you." "Oh." Mrs. Penelope smiled softly. She said, "Power's like fire, Grandma. It's only beautiful when it's contained." We sat in silence after that, listening to the cicadas hum. I thought about Cordelia, about the moment the cuffs clicked, about the twisted way she believed she was the hero of her own story. Maybe that was the real danger of power. The way it seduces you into thinking control equals purpose. I'd seen it destroy good people before. In September, I got an email from a production company in Los Angeles. They wanted to adapt our story into a documentary series called Suburban Justice. I almost deleted it, thinking it was spam. But then Sarah Kim called. "They're serious," she said. "They want you as a consultant." "I'm retired," I reminded her. She laughed. "You're retired from the bench, not from truth." So I agreed, reluctantly. Not for fame or money, but because stories matter. If people could see what we lived through, maybe they'd recognize their own Cordelias before things went too far. When the crew came to film, the neighborhood buzzed like opening night. They shot slow pans of the playground, the murals, the gardens. They interviewed Frank about the new bylaws, Sarah about the media fallout, and Mrs. Penelope about hope. When my turn came, the director asked, "If you could say one thing to the people watching, what would it be?" I looked into the lens and said, "Don't wait for heroes. Be your own." The cameraman lowered his rig and nodded quietly. The night the episode aired, the community center hosted a viewing party. The lights dimmed, the screen flickered, and there we were. Our laughter, our fear, our triumph, projected larger than life. When the scene came where Cordelia was arrested, the audience gasped even though they knew the ending. Some clapped, some cried. But the moment that hit hardest wasn't the downfall. It was what came after, the footage of neighbors rebuilding, planting gardens, painting over scars. As the credits rolled, Frank raised his glass. "To truth," he said, "and to never needing another Cordelia to remind us of it." The room echoed with the sound of clinking glasses and quiet pride. Later that night, after everyone had gone home, I walked through the park alone. The lamplight shimmered across the wet grass, and the mural by the entrance caught my eye, the one the Henderson kids had painted after everything ended. It showed a row of houses under a vast blue sky, each one glowing with light. In the center stood a tree with roots stretching into every home, its branches wrapped around a single word: trust. I stood there for a long while, the cool air brushing against my skin, and felt something I hadn't felt since before all of this began: calm. Not the fragile kind that breaks at the first sign of conflict, but the sturdy kind that comes from knowing you've already walked through the fire and come out whole. Weeks later, I received a letter from Cordelia, postmarked from a federal correctional facility. I almost didn't open it, but curiosity has always been my oldest flaw. The handwriting was tight, almost angry. "You destroyed my reputation, but maybe I needed it. Maybe power broke me before you ever did. I hope you're proud of what you built. I just wish I'd built something instead of trying to own it." I folded the letter and placed it in a drawer, not out of forgiveness, but as a reminder. Even villains can leave wisdom in their wake. Autumn came gently that year. The air smelled of pine and rain, and the community gardens flourished under golden skies. Children carved pumpkins where residents once filed complaints. Laughter replaced suspicion. I spent my mornings tending the soil and my evenings on the porch, listening to the rhythmic hiss of sprinklers. Every sound, every scent, every breeze carried the same message: we made it. Sometimes, neighbors stopped by to chat. Others brought pie, stories, or questions about bylaws. And once in a while, when the sun dipped low and shadows grew long, I'd find myself smiling at how ordinary life had become again. Ordinary and extraordinary because of it. The last entry I ever wrote for the HOA Freedom Watch blog was simple. Justice doesn't end with an arrest. It begins with awareness. What we grow in the soil of truth can outlast any fraud, any tyrant, any Cordelia. Protect your rights. Protect each other. And never let fear wear the mask of authority again. It became the site's most shared post. As I finished typing, I looked out the window at the soft glow of porch lights lining the street. My sprinklers clicked on right on time, misting the air in arcs of silver. Somewhere a child laughed. Somewhere a dog barked. And for the first time since all this began, I realized I no longer needed to look over my shoulder. The world would keep turning, the garden would keep growing, and Willowbrook, our Willowbrook, would keep shining. Because from the wreckage of deception, we had built something real, something lasting, a neighborhood that finally understood the meaning of justice. And the quiet sound of it was beautiful.